Well, gentlemen, thanks for joining me at 160 Studios down here in Delray Beach today.
Thank you.
Good to be with you.
Good to be here.
Yeah, good warm weather from where you came
Yeah.
from, right? But the weather's changing up near you.
Yeah.
Dave, where are you located out of?
Arizona.
Arizona. Oh, so you're fine there.
Yeah, we're doing fine.
All right.
Much of the same weather.
What part of Arizona are you?
Scottsdale, Paradise Valley.
Okay,
Yeah.
beautiful area.
Yeah.
Actually, we were just out there for
Yeah,
the
we were.
AvaMed conference.
Yep.
Yep. So look, I want to chat about something, right? The industry right now has run this experiment 2 times. We found that when categories transition from mechanical precision to digital intelligence, the incumbent mechanical tool generally loses. We're still early innings in it in medtech, but we have seen it with the soft tissue platform. We saw Medtronic and J&J be owners of that category for a long time in the billions of dollars, and they hesitated, they paid defense, and they determined that they were not going to be the ones to put themselves out of business. They let some others do it. And it feels like that's story number 2 coming on in orthopedics right now. We're watching it with things Surgical's doing in regards to most recent activities and what the strategics are doing by keeping their identity as the implant and the robot happens to be a secondary. So Stuart, your experience on that, and what was your motivation from day one? Because people told you what you're doing today and executing on wasn't possible.
Yeah. On the back of everything that Stryker achieved with the Mako acquisition and the introduction of robotics into orthopedics, they kind of defined the go-to-market model that everyone else eventually realized was working and winning. Therefore, everyone else is trying to play that same game. So when I showed up at Think Surgical, some of my friends gave me advice that you can't make money out of robotics unless you sell an implant to go with it. And I've been trying to prove them wrong ever since. And I actually believe that our advantage is that we don't sell implants. We can focus on the right thing for the customer and the right thing for the patient and uncouple that from sort of commitment to any one particular implant brand.
Yeah. David, you've spent time inside the large organization. In fact, you led Zimmer, and if I'm not mistaken, facilitated the Biomed acquisition. So as these other robotic companies, whether it's Stryker, whether it's J&J, whether it's Zimmer, you've been inside some of them. What do you notice now from the outside looking in on that playbook and that legacy model?
Well, I think that the development of the technology and the deployment of the technology is logical relative to the businesses, these established businesses that they oversee. And as Stuart points out, it's very implant driven with the high margin products. So anything that one can deploy by way of technology that facilitates choice of their implant and the ability to potentially take share from the competition is a great strategic tool. I think that not being encumbered by that established business is liberating to think more about what today's surgeons and the future marketplace is going to attach value to and to deploy that in a very different way than the established players are apt to do.
And Stuart, back to the question on, we're watching it declare itself with soft tissue and a quick scramble coming up right now. Why do you think there was so much resistance to separating and uncoupling the implant from the robot in the past until Think came along?
In joint replacement, as David was saying, the value is largely recognized by the conventional players as being in the implant. It's a very high gross margin implant sale. And robots have therefore been used as tools to capture implant volume and protect or control implant volume. And I think everyone just thought that that was, the way to make a successful robotics business. And, our approach where we're uncoupling the implant is confronting to them because it flies in the face of conventional wisdom. They don't understand how we can do it. And they feel threatened by it. So I think that's what's most exciting about this, is the fact that we are entering a period where I think we believe that you should enjoy the power of choice along with the precision of robotics, not one or the other.
David, from your perspective, you were an early believer in Think, and you came out of the belly of the beast in orthopedics. That was a very courageous decision to make, beyond just believing in it, but also one of the initial primary investors in pushing that tech forward. What did you see at that point in time so early that others might not have?
At that point in time, it was the R&D project that is now T-Mini. And my conversations from the initial months of diligencing that R&D project and the technology and the state that it was in at that point in time with Stuart, identified the fact that we had a very common view as to what that technology could do to transform the marketplace and change the ecosystem in a fundamental way that was going to be very patient-centric.
And patient, but I'll finish the spelling I-E-N-C-E versus I-E-N-T-S on this one. Where did you source the patience, I-E-N-C-E, to know you could eventually decouple it and have the surgeon go, I don't need to use that robot. I can use this robot, even though it's never been done before?
Well, I think that some of the fundamental advantages of the manifestation of the T-Mini technology, it integrates into the natural workflow that the surgeon was trained under. It does not disintermediate the surgeon in that regard. I think that the freedom of choice that was ultimately the vision for the company and now has become a reality for the marketplace was very attractive. And you saw a lot of other therapeutic areas moving towards precision medicine, and we saw, Stuart and I and the rest of the team saw this as being a big opportunity to enable precision medicine, true precision medicine within total knee replacement.
Once a year, I know you've probably read it, and you've probably read it at least once, Jim Collins' Good to Great.
Yeah.
Okay. And I was, over the last couple of weeks, I've been going through it and watching what you've been doing. And there's a passage in there in Good to Great, the Darwin Smith case study, which I think is a really relevant framework for what's happening in orthopedic robotics right now. And I'll remind you what it was and our viewers. Smith takes over Kimberly-Clark in '71, and the company is defined by being a paper mill company. And the mills are the identity, the analyst story, and the cultural anchor around their business. Smith makes a decision the board calls reckless and Wall Street calls a mistake. He sells the mills. And he says, I'm going to reinvest in consumer brands, Kleenex, Huggies, and products that touch the actual end user. 25 years later, Kimberly-Clark dominated the consumer paper products market and has outperformed every primary rival. Collins calls that level 5 leadership. The willingness, this is it, the willingness to divest the asset that defines you to become the thing you need to be. Let me say that one more time. The willingness to divest the asset that defines you to become the thing you need to be. So what do you think about, Stuart, being a robotics company first and that advantage?
Yeah. So eventually there comes a time where things like implants will become commoditized. I'm not saying we're there yet, but eventually we will get there. And a lot of the value will be in the digital technologies, the procedural technologies, and the data from the continuum of care. For me, when you repeat that passage, it makes me think of how difficult it would be for one of the big implant companies to jettison the implant and recognize that there's more value somewhere else, because they are such high margin, almost commodity items, some might argue. But they're generating billions of dollars in free cash flow each year. So, that is the conundrum that's facing the oligopoly, the 4 big companies that control 90% of the implant market.
The orthopedic mafia, as I call it.
You call them the orthopedic mafia, and I get to say that now that you've said it. But that's the challenge. And what would happen if they did is it would liberate them, because it's hard to invest in a robotics, digital, and data ecosystem and an implant ecosystem. They're both very thirsty investments. And to win in one, you have to deprioritize the other. Good example of that is what Stryker did with Mako. They prioritized Mako after the acquisition and deprioritized their implant portfolio. And it's not easy. But it's a definite opportunity, but it's incredibly difficult to do.
David, you and I had a conversation. You described these companies as constrained not by intelligence, but by obligation. Build on that for me.
Yeah, I think that, you know, in the context that we're talking about now, those are big established businesses with significant stakeholders and, you know, in effect, billions, if not tens of billions of dollars of capital that have been invested, and the stakeholders include the shareholders of those businesses. And so they're duty bound to generate results that are year-over-year top-line growth and year-over-year bottom-line growth. So navigating anything in the way of true transformation to divorce yourself from the value-creating implant to a longer-term technology vision, and longer term only has to be beyond 1 quarter in the world in which they live.
That's
right?
true.
So that's not an easy juggling act, I think, in transition. I don't at all believe that it's a lack of strategic thought or intellect among the leaders. I think that there's traditional culture that's built in, but more importantly, I think from their perspective, they have results to generate for those key stakeholders, their shareholders, and that doesn't make it easy to say, I'm going to go, you know, off the grid and deprioritize my high margin implant business, and X number of operating periods later, here's what that's going to look like. Tough lift for those people. You just cited a leader that made that transition. I think that there's probably another book filled with those that may have tried to do something like that no one's writing about today, right?
That's very true.
But again, the high quality data, I think that a company like Think is particularly advantaged by the fact that it sits in an agnostic way relative to the industry. And all the different implant systems, philosophies, and design characteristics embedded in those implant systems for, you know, a best fit for the patient and the surgeon's own philosophy being applied to get it right for that particular patient. By doing what Think is doing now in the open platform context, I think that data set is going to be far richer because of the multiple implant systems partners and diversity of surgical ideologies and techniques deployed by the surgeons. And you're really going to be able to let the data speak and interrogate that data in a way that's different than if it's one implant system, one robot system.
And again, this is where we're watching, you know, story number 2 in medtech and robotics is you know, J&J is a closed system. Intuitive's a closed system, Medtronic's a closed system. So what is the bias you're getting there, or the non-bias you're getting there for what's best for the patient, for sure. Yeah. Let's go back to the implant, the Stryker Triathlon implant that you independently worked through the FDA without Stryker's permission, right? And I don't know if permission's the right word. And you know, my inside baseball is like they were caught by surprise on that. Which is just amazing to me. That takes me back to I Love Lucy. You got some explaining to do, but that's a whole nother subject. But that was quite a remarkable feat by Think Surgical. Take me through how that occurred.
This goes back, 4 years, I think. We had a big dream that eventually one day we would not be in a position where we have to rely on partnerships with some of the small to mid-sized companies in the industry, but a dream that we could eventually get every implant onto our platform. And it started from a technological perspective. Was it even possible? It took us a couple of years to figure out not only was it possible, but we could do it, and we could do it with a level of precision that we felt gave us a shot at getting it through the FDA. But then the question was, okay, can you get something like this through the FDA? Because there is no agreement, there is no partnership, there is no exchange of intellectual property or design specifications between the two companies. Will the FDA see this as a safe and effective route to develop this product, this application for the Think robot? And it took us a long time to work through the strategy for how to approach the FDA. In fact, we did that in a couple of different steps. We stepped towards it. And it was only really at the end of last year, 2025, very late in December, where we got the phone call from the FDA saying, congratulations, you've got this approved, that we were like, whoa, after 4 years of working on this, not only is it possible, but we've done it. And it opened such a big doorway for us as a company. As you can imagine, we're very excited about it. It wasn't obvious or easy, is the point I'm trying to make, and particularly not obvious because of the way the industry is trained to think about things. And for that reason, we have protected it as a trade secret. How we do this is known only by a couple of dozen people inside our company. Every single one of them, myself and David included, have signed trade secret agreements, and we protect that so that hopefully we're the only company that can do this, at least for quite some time. The value in this is immense.
No doubt. And value, let's talk about value across the board. And I want to come back to, can an implant company could have potentially pulled this off, or is a Robotics-First company more likely to pull this off? And we'll come back to that. But the value, so now I'm a CFO of a hospital or of an ASC, and I'm looking at this. Tell me about the aperture I'm looking this through now. When I get this now, and suddenly, wait a minute, I've got leverage now. And I've also got what might be better for my patient. How does the CFO look at that?
I think it's a dream unlock from the CFO suite and the C-suite in general, in the sense of, many of those large practice groups have subsets of surgeons that are users of one implant company's total knee construct or another. And I don't know what the average would be, Stuart, but a couple, 3 or more systems for the larger hospital systems, right? And so they've got capital requests coming in some form for robot purchases, and those are all closed system acquisitions of one sort or another. Of course, the implant companies are creative about how they structure the financial elements of that, but they end up, if they're not paying for the robot up front, oftentimes it's some other kind of a lock-in with pricing determined by volume. And because it's a closed system, as you can imagine, when that next contract comes up, you already bought a robot, you probably don't have optimized leverage and talking about the terms of your renewal or the next phase contract with that particular implant supplier. So this tips that capability to make choices and still keep your surgeons that want to use a particular system happy, because they're intimately familiar with that system and they feel like they can do right by their patients with that system, with an agnostic robot that can satisfy all those surgeon subsets irrespective of what implant they choose, and then to negotiate the economic terms, as appropriate, and a more efficient marketplace with arm's length transaction, being what drives it, as opposed to a sunk cost robot that was purchased in the prior term dictating those terms.
Joe, joint replacement or knee replacement, let's talk about knee replacement, is an implant heavy DRG. In other words, the implant accounts for such a big portion of the DRG. That's one data point. The other data point is about 30% of surgeons routinely use a robot for total knee replacement. That's going to double over the next 3 years. We're past that tipping point. Everyone is running towards robotic total knee replacement. It's fast becoming a standard of care. So in that scenario that David described, now you've got hospitals or surgery centers that have to finance 2 or 3 different robotic systems to support those different subsets of surgeons who want their brand of choice. And it's not just the buying of the robot or amortizing it over an implant contract, it's the service costs that go with that every single year. So you think about if one robot can support any implant, so physicians get to choose and use what they think is best for their patients. The number of cases performed on that robot now goes up exponentially compared to a closed system. And unit economics are important in joint replacement. So how much of that cost of the robot gets amortized to each procedure makes a huge difference to contribution margin. So the economics of an open platform robot are incredibly positive from a CFO's perspective.
And let's take it a little step further too, that you touched on earlier, is now we've got one point of truth on data.
Yeah.
Because if you've got 3 different versions of a robot inside of a healthcare facility, you've got 3 different data silos, and all are somewhat biased, and your fidelity of data is somewhat opaque.
Yep.
So now we can really find out which implant performs better, with what type of patient, and get a true cost back to the CFO and the partners in that.
Yeah.
So that's really important. So we've got a 510K on the triathlon. And if we extrapolate that out in classic medical device, the first 510K is the hardest. Those that follow up, generally, we figure out how to get additional indications taken care of, in this case, implants taken care of. Is that a logical roadmap from now?
Every single brand of implant that's on our robot is subject to its own individual 510K. So when we were working with some of the smaller companies like Innovis, Medacta, and 6 other companies, we got their CAD models, we went through a rinse and repeat type of process, and a few months later, we got the FDA 510K. Now that we have Stryker as the, if you like, the predicate for doing this for companies where there is no pre-existing agreement with Think Surgical, that's exactly the same. We've got that method established at the FDA. We just rinse and repeat, and we keep moving forward. It'll be pretty quick. Fingers crossed.
Some people are hearing footsteps. Could a classic orthopedic culture implant company have pulled this off if they weren't a Robotics-First company? It's a hypothetical question, but if you had to play the odds.
Yeah, I'll tell you. Did I ever think about this when I was at Stryker and I was embedded and embroiled in everything triathlon and Mako? No. Didn't even start to think of this as a possibility until I sort of stepped out of Stryker and landed at Think Surgical. And I honestly don't think that the traditional orthopedic executive and leadership team could imagine about how to do this, never mind even want to do it. Because they're just so ingrained in everything we do is about selling more of our implants and returning more value to our shareholders. That's what they exist to do.
What was it that you held your breath on during this process, if there was one thing that you can share with us before we got that call in December from the FDA?
Well, I mean, the fundamental viability of that regulatory path forward was, as Stuart said, from a technical standpoint, as we plowed really several years of work and some really smart resources at that, we were very comfortable with our capability to do this correctly. Whether or not you're going to get to the point where you convince the FDA from a regulatory standpoint to clear on that basis was the thing that we all held our breath on. I mean, there have been other conversations with third parties of all sorts in time where you felt like you had great facts and strong arguments and ultimately did not prevail, right? That was a pretty big externality. But I would tell you that the interactions and communications were very constructive and substantive throughout the process, and so we became, cautiously optimistic at an increasing level with every round of those communications. I mean, the reason that was so important to us is the open platform concept was, to some extent, a bit theoretical prior to proving that that was a regulatory path to expand the addressable market for Think's technology, right? If it had to be a collaborative partnership with a particular supplier, you know, where the company started was picking up single-digit market share entities to ultimately accumulate to something like 8%, right? And so these 510Ks, in the case of the triathlon knee, you're grabbing tens of % of market share with each of them thereafter, and that addressable market starts to go from, you know, 8% to, say, 40-ish% with the Zimmer Biomet relationship to closer to 70% with triathlon on that system, and a path towards completing the rest of the pie chart.
Yeah. I'll tell you what I held my breath about. It was binary. It was a yes or a no.
Yeah.
And the implications of the yes and no were very different,
Pretty substantial.
as you can imagine. And you know, we used to talk about being an open implant company, but it wasn't really true in as much as we had lots of different implant brands on our portfolio. But as David said, collectively they accounted for about 8% of the US market. That's more implant agnostic. With the yes that we got from the FDA, we have a pathway to be truly open platform, and that's what changes the game.
Yeah.
I think that binary nature is an important distinction for these med tech companies that live in a 510K-able world too, right? They're the leaders, the decision makers, the culture of those entities is not that way. The human clinical trial companies are very much that way because they live in that world. In a 510K-able world, more typically what you're handicapping is, do we get another round of questions and get delayed by 3 or 6 months to the launch of a substantially equivalent product? This was different than that because it was such a differentiated path, and the effect that it would have on Think was pretty dramatic.
Much more like an IDE PMA path.
True,
really,
true.
Right. So if we extrapolate out, Think's not an implant company; it's a robotic company, and so that's liberating for you and for the industry at large. But then we take that to the next step: is, well, you're a robotic company. It doesn't mean that you're a data company by default.
Nope.
Right. So what does that mean downrange for Think? So do we stop at being a node in the data set as with the now agnostic robot, or what's the next potential landmark for us?
Yeah, I mean, David touched on it earlier, and I think you did as well. Once we're a truly open platform, we can connect preoperative data to intraoperative data collected on the robot in a way that wasn't possible before the robot, and that could be connected to outcome data down the road, either short or longer term. And it's that connection of the data that matters. Certainly in the foreseeable future, we'll be the only company that will be implant agnostic. So we'll collect data on any implant. And the value of that data set as it gets bigger and bigger and bigger is that the patterns will emerge, that maybe for certain patients, one particular design of implant works better than another, or for certain surgeons, one particular implant works better than another, or for certain alignment philosophies, one particular implant brand will perform better than another. And that is going to be incredibly valuable data, and it will lead to decision support tools and other data solutions that will have value down the road. So no, we're not going to stop there.
That might be in some of your platform.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's not there today, but it's all part of the vision.
David, when we chatted before, you had mentioned 25 to 27% of total knee patients are not completely satisfied post-procedure. The mobility is restored, but fit, feel, function not optimized. The clinical endpoint has been avoidance of revision surgery. Right? That's a pretty low bar.
At this point.
At this point.
Yeah.
So how does Think's data position change that, and what is possible for the patient cohort in that area?
Yeah, I think it's the driver of it's a multifactorial driven, patient satisfaction level I don't think that there is a silver bullet that eliminates that 25%. I think there are a whole bunch of elements that contribute to that 25% of not fully satisfied total knee replacement patients. And having an agnostic technology that is enriched by the preoperative plan and then the translation of that to the intraoperative execution of that plan, as well as the outcomes ultimately, where you've got the end-to-end data set that allows you to query the data and get to answers to questions that, you know, even mature, sophisticated registry data might highlight as an issue, but what's the root cause? What's the relationship between the way that patient presents and what they're feeling post-operatively? All of that is enabled uniquely by the agnostic hub that Think creates with the sophisticated preoperative planning, the intraoperative translation, and the execution of that plan. So I think it's very uniquely positioned and really becomes the hub to which one could connect all those other data elements to start to answer some of those questions to get after issues like lack of full patient satisfaction with the outcomes.
Yeah, and if we, I mean, I think we're all engineers here.
No.
No? I'm the only engineer here, right? But I'm like this lends itself to a classic Pareto, though. I mean, it's highly likely that 20% of the observations we make may fix 80% of this patient satisfaction.
Yeah.
If I had to say, you said it was multifactorial, no doubt about it, but not in an equal way, flat across the board.
Agreed.
Yep.
Yeah, so that'll be interesting for sure. So the framing starts to come in. You know, what should we be watching for in the industry now, whether it's Stryker or DePuy, and Zimmer's already made early moves on it. You know, again, we'll give credit where credit's due there. But what are some of the signals that have kind of come from the market that's going to have us sit back and go, okay, now they're making a move? What are you going to be watching for? And it's a heck of a culture to have to transcend from an implant company to now a digital agnostic robotic company. And there's investors to have to satiate, and quarterly numbers and executive bonuses, and there's a lot of impediments in the way here. But what will you be looking for first?
It's going to be very interesting, I think, to see how, you've talked about Zimmer, but I want to give Stryker a little bit of credit as well. I mean, they were the first company that recognized the opportunity of robotics and bringing the technology into the market through the Mako acquisition, and they really took the lead in driving the market to appreciate the value of the technology and the data. I think for Stryker, they've invested so heavily in Mako, and that brand has worked in terms of a value creation play for Stryker. The sort of unintended consequence of that is it's left their knee portfolio a little bit dated. On the other hand, you've got Zimmer, who've led the way with the what I'd call, most people consider to be the best knee implant in the market, the Persona knee. And Ivan's making all of these moves now to enhance his digital and data offering. It's going to be interesting to see what Smith & Nephew and DePuy do, because they're neither a leader in technology nor a leader in implants. And as I said earlier, both are very expensive to invest in. So I think it will be interesting to see how Stryker respond to Zimmer and what Zimmer's doing today. I think it will be interesting to see if DePuy and Smith & Nephew continue to fade, or if they have a strategy for coming back and challenging the other two market-leading companies. And I think it'll be very interesting to see how they all respond to what we're doing, because I don't think they'll all respond the same way to what Think are doing. I think some of those big players will embrace us as another channel, and some will probably try and push us back or defend against us or challenge us. And it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out.
It'll be interesting for sure. This is my own opinion. DePuy, they don't have the money to do this. J&J's made it clear they don't want to be in the orthopedics business that much anymore. I think they fraction that off because they're going after cardiovascular and heart health and Ottava coming out. You can't boil the ocean in that matter. So we'll see what happens with DePuy.
They picked the right guy to lead that spin. Namal is an exceptional leader. And if anyone can turn the DePuy Synthes brand into a market-leading brand again, it's Namal.
Yeah.
So,
as long as he has the backing from corporate.
well, once he's spun, I think he'll have a lot more freedom. Yeah.
That'll be fun to watch. But look, you've kicked the hornet's nest here. But something tells me you enjoy that.
Well, we're passionate about what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
People ask about, are you naturally bold? And bold's not really a word we use. We just get, passionate about what it is we're doing and why we're doing it. And the whole company's lined up behind that excitement about the value that we can create if we're successful in all of this. So we're kind of not so concerned about how others are reacting. We're more focused on what it is we're trying to do and the excitement that it's generating within the company.
Well, you're making the open platform model so evident. I mean, candidly, it's really hard to argue with it unless you're trying to defend a position that is somewhat of a legacy self-serving position. But to your point, when we chatted about it's not lack of intelligence or strategy, but it's being anchored into who you were yesterday. And without being able to put a bolt in the head of that to be who you can be tomorrow, that's going to be the challenge for the industry at large. I personally want to thank you after being in this industry for 35 years. And I used to tell people, I said, listen, what market are you thinking about going into? And they said orthopedics. I said, no, don't go into orthopedics. It's too sleepy. Go into cardiovascular, go into neuro, But what you've done and what some of your other peers are doing have really breathed incredible life into bringing high tech back to a plastic and metal industry. And so as early pioneers in that, closing up, what would you say to people who are building their careers as they make their decisions? They're 2 to 3 years out of university, they haven't settled in yet, and they're looking at it either from a marketing role, engineering role, software role. What would you say to them and say, why would you go into orthopedics at this point?
I think that the technologies like Think's open platform version of robotics are incredibly exciting. They're going to be high growth opportunities. And I think that one could anticipate that the established companies are going to have to make strategic decisions as to whether or not they want to chase with Me Too products in that category, or they want to adopt the open platform, and acknowledge that that's a market dynamic that has changed their ability to repurpose R&D dollars towards other big deal areas on unmet clinical needs. Think of infection. Think of being able to continue down the continuum of true precision health in the orthopedic context. Those are really exciting opportunities, and young people ought to be exploring, within the context of the established orthopedic industry, what are the true difference-making technologies, the unmet clinical needs that are yet to be solved, where they could make a big difference.
And Stuart, you left out one scenario that you're being humble about, is you can either develop your own technology that can take years and leave you behind, or you can buy one. And this has got to put Think right in the middle of that player target zone. And I know that wasn't your intention when you went there, but that's where we are right now. How does that potentially play out in the near future to 2 or 3 leaders?
Yeah, David and the rest of the board and myself, we're very excited about what an independent future for Think Surgical looks like, because of all the reasons you've articulated or helped us articulate here today, Joe. We are doing something different. We're doing something that's hard to argue against. It's hard to argue against as a clinician, as an executive, as a CFO, or as a patient. So we're kind of just excited about the mission, and where that takes us, nobody knows. But it'll be fun seeing where we end up.
No doubt.
all right? And I ended up in orthopedics by mistake, and I'm delighted that I did. And it chose me to use one of your posts. And I've been trying to get Joe Mullings to come in to comment on orthopedics for so many years, and I'm personally proud that I've managed to find a hook to bring you into this part of the industry, Joe. And I think it's a wonderful industry for young people to come into, because the relationship between an orthopedic surgeon and the industry is mutually respectful, mutually beneficial in a way that you don't find in all areas of med tech. And at the end of the day, patient outcomes are phenomenal, whether you use technology or not. They're only getting better with technology, but patients end up essentially healed and back to normal lives. So it's great.
And it's such a visceral relationship when you really dig into that OR with, and I've been a couple, I've been in I think a friend of both of ours is Stefan Kreutz's OR. And there's nothing more visceral than standing there watching a total knee take place. And it's fantastic. So I'm glad to see you expanding out this market right now, and appreciate both your gentlemen's time for coming down here.
Thank you for coming into the market, Joe.
Thanks for the invite, David.
Enjoyed it.
I'm Joe Mullings from 160 Studios. Be well.